Okay, I want to start this morning with just a few minutes to maybe give you a Flashpoint GeoProphecy update or report, if you will, on what is going on over in the Middle East. If you're watching the news, and I hope that you are, you will have seen in the last day or two an incursion, an invasion, if you will, from Turkey into northern Syria. And so I want to just take a few moments to kind of give you a little bit, hopefully, of context to it. It's still a very fluid situation, so I can't make big, bold pronouncements because there really hasn't been enough time to digest a lot of the things that have been taking place there. But I do want to give you some of the context so that as you watch the news and as you hear things coming out, that you'll have a better sense of how to place them in this proper context. It's important to understand that the Kurds are the people group that are significantly affected by this incursion by Turkey across Turkey's southern border into the area of Syria. We'll talk about Turkey in a moment, but I want you to understand that a lot of people, if you're listening to the news, will be telling you this is a dire situation for the Kurdish people. There are about 28 million Kurdish people in the world, and that, depending on who you talk to, that number can fluctuate, but about 28 million in the world. They're the largest identifiable people group in the world without their own homeland, without their own country. They are dispersed between several different countries. And just to give you, don't do too much math, but I'm just going to give you a ballpark. In Turkey, the guesstimates are there's about 12 million Kurds, and they're in the area of southeast Turkey primarily, about 12 million, and then in Iraq between 5 and 6 million, again up in northern Iraq, and another 6 million approximately in Iran. And then guesstimates are that there is about 1 to 2 million that are in Syria. Okay? So you can see that they're generally in this area, but they're distributed among these four nations. And so they don't have a homeland, and the Kurds are desperately seeking a homeland of their own. You shouldn't think that some of them are more peaceful and just want to live their lives, and there are others who resort to terrorist activities to try to drive their point home and to make inroads in this area to push for a national homeland. And you should know that the countries that they reside in are very concerned that the Kurds may rise up, as they're trying to do, and may try to form their own homeland, creating new national boundaries, which of course would impact all of these nations. Now, during the Syrian war, over the last several years, you had a lot of Syrian refugees due to what ISIS was doing in the region. Okay? So due to what ISIS was doing and moving in, creating their so-called caliphate, there were a lot of Syrian refugees that were fleeing for their life, and many of them made their way to the north into Turkey. Some went south into Jordan and other places, but a vast majority of them, estimates are 1 to 2 million of them, have made their way from Syria into the area of Turkey. And then, of course, Turkey was trying to move many of them off through the islands of Greece and on into Europe. Many of them also went to Germany as well. So you have a lot of, not Kurds, but refugees from Syria, probably most likely Sunni Muslims, that these refugees have moved into Turkey. So now the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he wants to offload, if you will, a lot of these refugees. And so he says, well, I can solve several things in one bold stroke, one bold move. And he's been saying this for quite some time. This is not a new thing. He has been threatening to move across the border here into Syria for a long period of time. And he's been saying this publicly for a long period of time. Our news doesn't report it, but he's on record as saying that this was his goal from a long time ago. So what he wants to do is he wants to create a buffer just below the Turkish border, about 20 or 25 miles deep, for about 75 to 100 miles long. So right here, right in the blue area of Syria, right along the Turkish border, he wants to create a buffer zone, is what he says, and he wants to repopulate that area with Syrian Sunni Muslim refugees that have moved into Turkey during the Syrian war. He wants to repopulate them down in Syria in this so-called buffer zone. So you think, well, okay, that kind of makes sense. He wants to repopulate them back into their homeland. But he has a strategy. And the reason that he selected this area is because he knows that the Kurds who live in the region, as we talked about a few minutes ago, the Kurds live in this area, populate a heavy population of Kurds in this area of northern Syria, in this portion of Turkey, in the northern portion of Iraq, and in the northwestern portion of Iran. They want to, again, bring the land areas together to form a Kurdish country. So he's concerned because he has these Kurds on his southern border and he doesn't want them to be able to unify geographically. So by creating this buffer zone, not only does he create a buffer of pushing the Kurds away, some of whom do terrorist activities, perpetrate terrorist activities in Turkey, but others have been fighting alongside of America in the war against ISIS. He figures he can create a buffer zone to push them back, and he can populate right in the center of this Kurdish region. He can populate that area with Syrian Sunni Muslims that are not Kurds, right in the center of the Kurdish region, to keep them from coalescing together, to keep the Kurds from coalescing to form a national country. Now, we know from Scripture that this is even more significant, because when you go to Ezekiel chapter 38 and chapter 39, and I would suggest also it dovetails with Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, and other portions of Scripture in Revelation 13, and we'll hopefully in sessions ahead we'll dive into that a little bit more. But we know clearly from Ezekiel 38 and 39, we're talking about a last days prophecy of nations that will group together to form a coalition over which the Antichrist will rule in the last days. And we know from that passage clearly in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that both Turkey and Iran will be part of the Antichrist's coalition that will come down into Israel. And we know that Turkey and Iran will unify together as at least two of the 10-nation confederation of nations that will be under the umbrella of the Antichrist. One individual that the Bible speaks of that will come down and attack Israel in the last days. So you can read it yourself in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. The area of Turkey and some of those tribal names that were mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39, along with the Medo-Persian area, or Elam, that's Iran, they're going to unify. Now in the short term, they both have opposing objectives. Iran wants to re-establish the greatness of its Persian Empire. So Iran, you can see it happening right before your eyes, ladies and gentlemen. Iran is moving assets into a weakened Iraq, and into a weakened Syria, and into a weak Lebanon, where Iran has a proxy in southern Lebanon right against the Israeli border called Hezbollah. So Iran continues to flex its muscle towards the Mediterranean Sea. This is part of what I term the Shia Crescent. You may have heard me talking about the Shia Crescent. It's a well-known concept for people who study the Middle East, that Iran is forming what is the northern part of a crescent moon and moving its sphere of influence to the west. So Iran wants to reestablish the greatness of the ancient Persian Empire, and to do that, it must move to the west, and that's exactly what it's doing. Turkey, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the greatness of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, which ruled the Middle East from 1517 to 1917. The Ottoman Turks think that they ruled the best in the Middle East. They're Islamic, and they controlled large swaths of the Middle East all the way down to the areas of Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. Turkey thinks that they're the rightful custodian of the most holy sites in Islam in Mecca and Medina. We think, oh, it's always been Saudi Arabia. No, it always hasn't been Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a relatively modern nation. The Ottoman Turks controlled the two most holy sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina, for many hundreds of years. And so the Ottomans and today Turkey under President Erdogan, they want to reestablish the greatness of the ancient Ottoman Turkish Empire. And so they must move south. And that's why so many people who study Bible prophecy are very concerned when they see Turkey making a push, an invasion into Syria across the borders. into this area of Syria. Because we think that Erdogan, based on statements that he's made through the years and very bombastic statements in recent years, that he doesn't hide it at all. He wants to reestablish the greatness of the Ottoman Empire, and he wants to move south. So this gives him a pretext to do that, to move across his border and get a foothold into the area of Syria, and at the same time move these refugees from Syria back into this buffer zone and to thwart the Kurdish efforts to unify the Kurdish region into one nation. So that's kind of the backstory to all the things that are going on. From the standpoint of President Trump and our government, it's a very difficult situation. I know that everybody kind of wants to jump in one camp or another. What I would say here is we need to kind of let it play out. From a believer standpoint and from the standpoint of loyalty to the group that has helped us to defeat ISIS, which would be the Kurds, my heart breaks for those who are going to be suffering when Turkey is doing its incursion. On the other side of the coin, I understand that we don't want to be having these wars that are unending and they continue on seemingly forever, and we end up policing throughout the whole world. What President Trump's philosophy is, he's very practical from everything that I read and see about him. He wants these other nations to shoulder more of the responsibility. And he feels that as long as we're there, these other nations don't shoulder their part of the responsibility, both militarily and economically. And so his idea, I think, because he's done it in other places where he's put pressure, he says, look, if you want to have peace in the region, Saudi Arabia, you got a lot of money. United Arab Emirates, you've got a lot of money. Step up, either with soldiers or with money, to support your desires in the region. If you want to have peace in these areas, then you need to step up and foot the bill for it. So that's the flip side, I think, of what President Trump is saying in all of this. And I will tell you, you have to understand that these two entities, Turkey and the Kurds, they essentially have both been allies of the United States. In a technical sense, both are allies of the United States right now. So what President Trump was dealing with is two allies of the US, the Kurds who fought with us against ISIS, and the Turks who are part of NATO. And NATO works with the United States. So even though Turkey seems to be going rogue in recent days and doing things that are not in our interest and that we disagree with as a nation, they're still part of NATO. So what President Trump is dealing with is two entities that are both technically allies of the United States. And I think what he said is, we're going to step back, you two work it out. Now, unfortunately, what Turkey saw that as is a green light to just go in and do what it wanted to do. And so we'll have to see how that all plays out. But it is a very complicated situation, and it's going to get more complicated in the days ahead. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context about the situation and what to be watching for as things continue to unfold in that part of the world.